Breaking tonight, evidence that the case against the 6 Baltimore police officers charged in Freddie Gray's death may be falling apart. Less than a week after those charges were announced with such fanfare. Good evening and welcome to the Kelly File, everyone. I'm Megyn Kelly. The charges these officers are facing range from assault to second-degree murder. And now we are hearing reports that the police investigation into the incident does not support the charges, including the second-degree murder charge, but that's not all. Also, the DA charged several officers with false arrest, arguing Freddie Gray did nothing wrong, that the knife he had on him was entirely legal. But now we've heard lawyers and investigators on the case are saying the knife that Gray was carrying was illegal under Baltimore City Code. And the problems don't end there. Listen to what a former state attorney for the city of Baltimore had to say just last night.
When I read the probable cause statement that she put out to justify her charges, I saw 2 immediate problems. One is that they don't justify the charge of second-degree murder against the driver of the van. And the second, the charges against the arresting officers, I feel, are really very dangerous. And she could not have thought that through in those 2 weeks in bringing those charges.
Trace Gallagher is live in our West Coast newsroom with the story. Trace?
Megyn, back in the O.J. Simpson case, the mantra was, if the glove doesn't fit, you must acquit. In the case of Freddie Gray and the Baltimore police, we're now hearing if the knife is illegal, the arrest was legal. In other words, if this is a spring-loaded knife, a switchblade, like the one on the left that automatically snaps open, it's illegal in the city of Baltimore. If the knife has a spring mechanism that simply helps the user open the blade, then it's legal. But many lawyers point out that even if the knife was legal and the officers thought it was illegal and they acted in good faith, the arrest is likely justified. State Prosecutor Marilyn Mosby conducted her own investigation because she wanted to distance herself from the police. But the police investigation could hurt her case. For example, Officer Caesar Goodson Jr. was charged with murder, but police investigators found the most serious charge would be manslaughter because murder requires intent. And police investigators say their sources will indicate that the medical examiner did not plan to rule this a homicide, and yet the state prosecutor says it was ruled homicide. There are also reports that police can prove, contrary to what the state prosecutor says, that the officers who took Freddie Gray to the police station did try to get him medical help along the way, but there was confusion with emergency responders. And the state prosecutor's independent investigation was headed up by former Baltimore police officer Avon Mackle, who in 2009 was stripped of his command post for mishandling an investigation months after he was demoted and despondent, and reportedly he was drunk. Mackle was tased at his home by a Baltimore SWAT team for erratic behavior. Now, defense attorneys for the officers involved in the Freddie Gray case are alleging that Mackle had an axe to grind. And while the defense tries to poke holes in the prosecution's allegations against these 6 police officers, prosecutors are responding by accusing the defense of leaking information and attempting to try this case in the media.
All right, hold on just 1 second before I let you. You're telling me that the DA's lead investigator is some dude who had been kicked out of the police force and had been tased by the cops?
The DA's, the man who led the independent investigation is a former Baltimore police officer who was demoted and then had an incident at his house, who reportedly was, says the defense, had an axe to grind, or at least that's their allegation of this, Megyn. Okay.
That would be a relevant fact. Trace, thank you. So is this case falling apart 4 days after it was filed? Joining me now, Mark Eiglarsh, a criminal defense attorney and a former prosecutor. So that guy probably has no axe to grind with the cops.
No, completely free from any bias, Megyn, including the prosecutor herself with all the connections. Megyn, I'm outraged. Let's start with the false imprisonment. Really? Our cops need to be perfect now, or else they lose their livelihood and potentially their liberty? So let's just understand something. It either is a legal knife or it's not.
Right.
I don't think that that's what this case should hinge upon. Even if they reasonably believed it had some spring action in it and thus violated Baltimore law, that's enough. Cops make mistakes every day, Megyn.
Right.
They're not arrested for it.
And the irony is she's charging them with false imprisonment for making an arrest that had no basis in her view. isn't there a good argument she just did the same thing to them? Shouldn't she be charged with false imprisonment if that's the standard?
One could make that argument. Let me explain something. Every day in every courtroom, cops are making mistakes because they're human. I've seen in my career over 2 decades in the criminal justice arena, probably about a dozen and a half cases specifically where cops believe that knives are unlawful and shouldn't be possessed in a concealed manner. And then later it's researched and it turns out they were wrong. They're not arrested. Why are these cops stripped of their liberty?
And then on top of that, we're understanding that because this isn't like the cops, those 6 cops themselves said the knife was illegal and therefore she dismissed it. They're saying a separate group of cops investigating these cops you're looking at here looked at the knife and said, I've got news for you, Ms. Prosecutor. That knife is illegal. It may not be illegal under the state of Maryland law, but it's illegal under Baltimore law, which legitimizes this arrest. And on top of that, they concluded there's no basis for a murder charge. At most, these cops were negligent. There was no intent. And also they're reporting now that that was the conclusion, the initial conclusion of the medical examiner. And then suddenly, after possibly some discussion with her, his report was changed to conclude homicide.
Yeah, no, that was my immediate conclusion. Second-degree murder, they must have evidence beyond the exclusion of every reasonable doubt that this driver said, I'm going to give this guy a real job here. I'm going to take turns at a fast rate of speed. I'll slam on my brakes and give him a really rough ride to the police station. That's not her theory, Megan. Her theory is that they didn't give him proper medical care and they didn't buckle him in. For that, they may be negligent. They may even be criminally negligent. But to get it to a willful and wanton disregard of human life, recklessness, it's not there. And second degree is not there, Megan.
That's right. And on the question of the knife, so now the attorneys representing these cops who are charged with false imprisonment, for which they could spend years in prison, right? For you know, arresting him wrongly for thinking it was a switchblade when allegedly it wasn't. Now they say, just produce the knife. Let's see the knife so we can figure it out. Well, and she comes out and says, I'm not going to try this case in the media, which she's already out there last week saying, I will find justice for Freddie Gray, which, by the way, her job is still just to seek justice. It's not justice for Freddie Gray. It's justice. But now she doesn't want to try the case in the media.
And let's give her, let me defend her to keep this fair and balanced. Let's just say she's got a busload of nuns who overheard the 2 cops charged with false imprisonment saying, let's frame Freddie Gray like the Mona Lisa. We know that this knife right here, we know it is lawful, props. But let's go ahead. Yeah, I bring it to the show. And let's just say we say that this is illegal, okay? That's different. You charge them. You go ahead. That's not what happened here, Megan.
Mark, thank you for being here.
Thanks, Meg.
We've got some breaking news coming on right now. Minutes ago, the Department of Justice announcing, what a shock, it will investigate the Baltimore Police Department after a request, which I'm sure the DOJ had nothing to do with, from the Baltimore mayor to do exactly that. That report just moving on the wires as I was speaking with Mark. Now, it was just a week ago that Reverend Al Sharpton was suggesting the federal government needs to take over all policing across this country, which is not really constitutional. And some legal experts suggest we're already well on our way down that road. Shannon Coffin is the former Assistant Deputy Attorney General, and he was in the DOJ Civil Rights Division. He was also former counsel to Vice President Dick Cheney. Shannon, good to see you again. I'm shocked that the Department of Justice is going to step into this case. Are you?
You've taken all the mystery, all the guesswork out of what I had to say. Look, this is the mayor of Baltimore is being hailed for her courage by the Washington Post in asking DOJ. I would suggest it's actually a sign of remarkable political weakness to ask the Department of Justice, the federal government, to come in basically and take over your police department.
I would suggest to you, Shannon, having covered a number of these cases in the past couple of years, the request probably came the other way, and then she came out and said publicly, yes, I'd love for them to get involved. Would you please?
So, and this wouldn't be the first police department that the Department of Justice has under the pretext of federal law, basically sought to take over. They're running the police department in New Orleans, Seattle, Newark. They're looking at Cleveland, and of course, you know, in Missouri, you know, we know very well that they're conducting an investigation.
Do they ever open an investigation and turn around and say, No problem. Everything's looking good here. I mean, everything we've seen over the past couple of years has been, this is the most racist, disgusting police department ever, and unless they answer to the DOJ, was Eric Holder, now Loretta Lynch, for the next several years, we're going to shut them down.
Look, under this Department of Justice, I'm not aware, of any investigations that haven't led to basically a consent decree where the department forces the local law enforcement to comply with what are effectively federal standards.
Andy McCarthy has been saying this for months. He says they go in, they say we're going to conduct an investigation. The police department cannot afford to fight the DOJ, so they wind up cowering in submission, just saying, all right, we'll do what you want us to do. But Barack Obama's been very clear about, he has this task force that basically wants to control local law enforcement. The problem is that's not really how the country was set up.
The ominously named Task Force on 21st Century Policing has said we want to use federal funds in order to basically impose our will on what good law enforcement conduct is on local law enforcement, and we'll dole out those funds according to which departments are basically following our lead. And that takes away all of the innovation and all of the local control that our founders anticipated and wanted at the state and local level.
You had the mayor going out there and saying, I want the DOJ to investigate whether we have a racist police department. She's an African-American. Her police commissioner is an African-American. Her police force is majority minority. 3 of the 6 cops who were arrested in this case were African-American. And even in these circumstances, we need a federal investigation into whether this is a racist police department. If it can happen in Baltimore, it can happen anywhere. Anywhere.
That's right, and they don't stop at just the question of racism. They ask about excessive force. They ask about searches and seizures. They comb entirely over all of the practices of the law enforcement, and they're going to find something.
Shannon, thanks for being here.
It's happening in Ferguson, right?
Thanks for being here, sir.
Thank you.
Well, as we get this breaking news out of Baltimore, we're also hearing this may be just the start of a long summer of trouble in American cities, as polls suggest race relations are getting worse. Wasn't President Obama supposed to signal a change? That debate is next. Plus, a female recruit at the Fire Academy fails her fitness test but gets to graduate anyway. Brian Kilmeade is here on that when we come back in just a bit.